you have something that's called the erector pili muscle that holds your hair follicle in place within your skin.
Huh.
Now, if that erector pili muscle detaches from the hair follicle in your scalp, that follicle dies.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to Think Big Bodybuilding Media. I'm Scott McNally, and back with me today is Dr. Dean St Mart. Today, we're going to talk about a few things, including hair loss, which has been a topic that it's kind of a niche topic. A lot of people in bodybuilding, they just shave their heads and they're fine with that. And then if I talk a little bit about my hair loss protocol, which I'll talk a little bit about today, then there's always a handful of people that want to know more. So I thought this would be fun. First of all, man, I'm happy to have you back. It's been a little while.
It definitely has, yeah. I was only saying to there, it's probably been February, so it's nearly 10 months ago.
Yes.
It's been too long.
It's been a long 10 months for me, that's for sure. And you're working independently now. You quit your day job as an engineer. You are working full time now with Supplement Needs. Fantastic company, by the way. You guys are knocking it out of the park, man, with some of the best health supplements that are available on the market. So I'm really happy to know there's companies like Supplement Needs out there.
Yeah, and I'm really happy that it exists as well, because it definitely for a long time was required in this industry, where I was just, even myself as a consumer a few years ago, just annoyed that people were getting ripped off, or there was nothing really catered towards, the whole I guess audience of this channel with bodybuilders, and keeping bodybuilders healthy and safe and given the right education.
Yeah.
So it's definitely like I said to you before we started, it's very surreal that this is now my full-time job.
It's freaking awesome, man. And you're doing good things. I think that bodybuilding is lucky to have you, because I can tell you that back when I started, we were simply told take some milk thistle, and that was the only health supplement that we used. Milk thistle, 1,000 milligrams while you're on an oral. Outside of that, you're good. Just make sure you run your PCT, and that's it. You're fine, period. That's it.
And then I guess we are starting to wonder why perhaps guys now from 20 years ago who might have started using are suffering health consequences. So
yeah,
it's definitely an interesting time that we live in, with obviously the accessibility of the internet and the open transparency of people like myself and Victoria, etc., that are, giving out free education to those who are going to listen. But because ultimately, at the end of the day, I want people to live happily into their 50s, 60s, 70s without suffering consequences of some of the choices they may have made.
Hell yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great point. I know you guys have, as your shirt says, Supplement Needs Education, SN Education, and that you have a big thing that you've put together or are putting together over there about hair loss. We won't be able to go in quite as deep, because the reality is I don't have the attention span to sit here for the next hour and learn everything. But I want to, I don't know if some of our listeners do. Some of them do. But I thought let's maybe look at some of the, I guess more than bullet points. I want to know a couple things. I want to know, what are the causes of hair loss to start? And then maybe we could talk a little bit about, what are some of the things we could consider to, I guess, keep hair or regrow hair. Where would you want to start with something like this?
I guess we can talk about potentially some of the mechanisms of why your hair falls out, okay. And then we can have a discussion of some of the treatments, or why certain treatments work and others don't. But like you said, with SN Education, this was basically a topic that arose because I put a picture on social media of my own hair regrowth.
Yes.
I basically got my hair cut in the summer, and it was really bad. I had quite a lot of temporal thinning up here on both the left and right side. And I just turned to my wife, Morgan, and said, how come you never ever said this to me, that my hair was this bad? And she turned around and said, well, to be honest, I was never really paying attention. But now that you do say it, yeah, it is quite thin compared to when I first met you. So I guess probably one of the things that happens with guys, like you said, they either shave their head or they get lazy and just ignore it.
Yeah.
And the issue is that we're going to see when we have a little chat here is it's irreversible if you don't intervene quickly. What effectively will happen is the hair follicle will die, and the only way you're getting that hair follicle back will be with a transplant. So it's imperative that when you start to see, thinning of hair or miniaturization, where the hair is, becoming very fine and thin, or you have lost hair, basically where it's fallen out, that you intervene quickly enough to stimulate that hair follicle to grow again, for those stem cells to start growing.
Yeah.
So that the hair follicle is basically kept intact.
Am I right in this? Because I think I've heard that if you are visually seeing hair loss, that you've already lost a lot. Like you have to lose a ton of your hair before you actually can notice it.
Yeah, like on average with the hair growth cycle, you'll lose between 50 to 100 hairs per day.
Okay.
So when you rub your hand through your hair and you see hair actually in your hand, sometimes guys freak where they psychologically think they're losing their hair, but in fact it's just part of the hair cycle where you shed a hair, which is effectively called a club hair. So that hair can no longer grow. It's detached from stem cells in the hair follicle. So effectively it's just resting in your scalp. Okay. And eventually your scalp releases that hair and starts growing a new one. So that's effectively a club hair will fall out, and you'll see that naturally on your pillow.
Hopefully now, it starts growing a new one. That's what I'll say.
Exactly. It's sort of like, when you start to see this, I guess, bitemporal thinning. So basically that sort of widow's peak or both sides, that's sort of the first area where we start to see the genetic predisposition for this androgenic alopecia to happen.
Yeah.
So I guess with hair loss, before we get off on a tangent with alopecia from androgenetic issues, there's sort of 7 major ways that you can have hair loss. The first one would be known as telogen effluvium, and that's sort of where your hair falls out due to stress. So when you're undergoing a real stressful period, this is more so females will notice this. You'll see an increased shedding, or what we call a sort of resting phase of our hair. And you're shedding hair at a faster rate than the anagen phase, which is where your hair grows, is keeping up. So it's all about keeping this balance between the anagen phase, which is where your hair grows, and the telogen phase, where your hair sort of rests or waits to be shed.
Okay.
So the telogen effluvium is normally caused by psychological stress, or it can be caused by physical stress, but that's where your hair is sort of being shed, but there's hair still growing underneath. So it's not sort of an alopecia that would be irreversible.
Yeah.
Once you address that stress, it should restore balance to the hair follicle, and that shedding will cease.
Yeah.
Then you've sort of got nutritional impacts. So again, your hair is made of keratin, which is a protein. So if you're not ingesting enough protein, or you're not getting enough vitamins and minerals like vitamin A, vitamin D, zinc, I think vitamin C plays a role as well, selenium, they can all lead to obviously brittle hair, and hair is going to fall out then, because again, it's not being nourished at the follicle.
Yeah.
You've got endocrine imbalances like androgenic alopecia, where you have a higher amount of androgens in your body, and that's going to affect the hair cycle. So in other words, you're shortening that anagen phase where your hair is growing, and you're lengthening that telogen phase where the follicle is resting. And effectively over time then, the follicle isn't producing hair at a faster rate than it's being shed, and eventually that follicle dies if you don't keep up with that I guess anagen phase imbalance.
So that's probably going to be like the majority of our viewers and listeners.
Yeah. And then like obviously the other ones, this is all, there's a nice published paper where it breaks down like sort of the 7 major causes of hair loss. You've got, certain drugs can cause hair loss. And a lot of guys don't realize that, use of AIs, aromatase inhibitors, where you're lowering your estrogen too much,
yes,
can affect your hair.
Yes.
So you need a steady concentration of estradiol in order to encourage blood flow to your scalp, and also to limit the amount of testosterone in your scalp that can be produced over to DHT. So estrogen is very important for your hair. And another thing, obviously, would be something like tamoxifen, which is a selective estrogen receptor modulator. Using tamoxifen to block that estrogen receptor, if it happens in the scalp, you're going to upset that balance. So again, you might see hair shedding.
I'll be damned.
With the use of tamoxifen. So you're sort of, it's a double-edged sword here. If you use either tamoxifen or an AI, that balance of estrogen is very important for your hair. And then I guess the other ones would be, certain diseases or malignancies, like again, cancer, etc., would lead to hair loss. But I guess the one that's going to really interest people here is that androgenic alopecia, where we have hyperandrogenemia. Basically, you've got too much androgens within the body, which can then act locally on the hair follicle, upset the balance of this hair cycle between the anagen and telogen phase, and ultimately over time lead to miniaturization of your hair, so you're no longer producing thick hair. And eventually what will happen is you have something that's called the erector pili muscle that holds your hair follicle in place within your skin. Now, if that erector pili muscle detaches from the hair follicle in your scalp, that follicle dies. So you can imagine, as the hair miniaturizes and becomes thin, the attachment of that muscle within the dermis gets less strong, so it becomes weak. And if you allow that miniaturization to continue, eventually that erector pili muscle that's attached to the hair follicle detaches, and again that's there for strength, but then it also causes the detachment of where you have stem cells within your hair follicle detaching also.
Okay.
So this is important, that when you start to see hair loss, that you correct it as soon as possible, because when you get to that point whereby the erector pili muscle has detached from the follicle, you end up in a scenario then where you have basically lost that hair follicle and you're going to be bald unless you transplant a new graft of a hair that's already attached to the erector pili muscle.
Okay.
So that's sort of why we need to intervene as soon as possible when we start to see hair falling out. Then we can sort of get into, the real sort of nitty gritty. But I'll keep it as simple as possible here, that you have your hair follicle, and at the bottom of it we have what's called the dermal papilla. And the dermal papilla is what attaches to the bulb of your hair. So at the bottom of your hair follicle, you've got this dermal papilla, and out of that grows the hair. If that dermal papilla detaches from the hair follicle as well, you lose blood flow to the hair follicle, and again, that follicle dies. So it's important that, we've got quite a number of physiological things that we have to consider when we're looking at the health of that hair follicle, and ensuring that this telogen phase, the resting phase of our hair, stays as short as possible in order for the hair underneath to progress back to anagen and grow a new hair shaft.
Okay.
So sort of the main ways we tackle hair loss, there's sort of 4 approved ways of addressing hair loss. So we can either increase blood flow to that dermal papilla.
Yes.
So that dermal papilla now has more blood going to it, more nutrients, more keratin, more growth factors, etc., that stimulates the growth of that hair. So if you can bring more blood flow to the hair follicle, there's a chance then that we're bringing more nutrients and encouraging that hair shaft to grow again.
Did you see that study where they actually talked about, like, I can't remember what the duration was, but they were doing head massages?
Yeah, head massage and microneedling is a big thing.
Yeah,
that effectively helps. So microneedling, not only good for helping collagen in the skin, you can actually do microneedling to stimulate hair growth.
no kidding.
And it's something that's become very popular in the last 10 years. So what you're sort of playing on when you do microneedling is you're encouraging blood flow to that hair follicle through inducing a wound. So if you
Yeah.
think about it, when you get a wound anywhere in your body, if you get a cut, you have all these platelets, clotting factors coming to the area to help heal that wound.
Yeah.
Now, when you have a wound within a hair follicle, the same thing happens again. You have an immune system within your scalp, as you would anywhere in your body. But the immune system in your scalp is very important because it helps to basically break down dead tissue that's in the scalp, again, cleaning up the area if there's any bacteria or pathogens present that might be upsetting the balance of the microbiome of the scalp. When we induce a wound in the scalp, these sort of, immune response cells come in, tidy up the area, bring these growth factors with them, and help stimulate the growth of hair again. So with that microneedling, it's a really nice way to help stimulate the growth of hair. But also, you're creating micro channels in your skin, so you're punching little pores into your skin with this microneedle. So if you're using topical solutions like Minoxidil or Finasteride or other things that we know that we can apply to the scalp, you're creating a little micro channel to allow that solution to penetrate into the dermis as well.
I'll be darned.
Because
that makes sense.
We know that the barrier of the skin is quite thick, and again, it's there to stop things from being absorbed. So if we can get more, I guess, local absorption of a compound through the surface of the skin to the root of the hair follicle, you're going to, for example, Minoxidil increases blood flow to your scalp.
Yeah.
So if minoxidil can actually penetrate your scalp, it's going to encourage more blood flow, more growth factors, etc., to that hair follicle. And again, you're going to be enriching that dermal papilla with more nutrients, and your hair becomes stronger again.
Yeah. So first of all, this is kind of funny. Matt had said he needs this study so that he can show his wife, so that he can get some more head rubs. I think they were saying it was like 25 minutes a day or something like that, which, I mean, that's a big commitment to get a head massage every day for 25 minutes. I know now for skin, they use a thing that I've heard from people that actually are in, the beauty industry, called a derma roller, that does microneedling across the surface of your face for resurfacing. Yeah. Is that what you would use on your head, or how does that work?
Yeah. You get a derma roller. The study they done was between 0.6 of a millimeter to 1.5 millimeter.
Okay.
So effectively a derma roller that you'd use on your skin, but you're using it on your scalp.
Huh. I'll be darned.
So again, if you think about it, with the skin, it's helping to stimulate collagen production.
Yeah.
So again, when you're using a derma roller, you're encouraging collagen to come to the area of that hair follicle. So you're bringing all these growth factors.
Yeah.
The main one being, it's called vascular endothelial growth factor, VEGF. And that's sort of one of the main ones that helps hair proliferation.
Can we get like our
microneedling,
research chem company owners that are listening? Let's get on that.
Like, that's sort of one of the easiest ways that you can encourage blood flow to the scalp.
Okay.
So you can do that, 2 or 3 times per week. And then, like I said, if you incorporate it with topical application, there's a really nice study, if you put it into PubMed, about using microneedling along with minoxidil therapy.
Huh.
And the results are incredible when you see the difference in pictures between the males who applied minoxidil only and the males who done microneedling or derma rolling twice a week and then continued their minoxidil therapy on top.
Huh.
So that's something that everyone can do at home. Just make sure that, if you're going to do it, that you follow like good hygienic practice, because effectively you are causing wounds in your scalp that can lead to infection. Yeah.
It sounds like one of those things. Like, I know bodybuilders were like, hey, if 500 milligrams of test is good, then 3 grams is better. I can imagine some of these guys, some of our people could take this too far. So go easy, you're saying, and start light with it.
They do warn that if you do combined therapy of derma rolling with applying a topical solution, that you avoid applying the topical solution after derma rolling.
Okay.
The reason being is you might increase the chance of systemic circulation
Oh
or
yeah.
systemic absorption.
Yeah.
And if we sort of look at why minoxidil came about in the first place, it was actually an oral drug for lowering blood pressure.
No kidding. Huh.
But
I didn't know
everyone
that.
who took everyone who took oral minoxidil ended up with what's called hypertrichosis,
Okay.
which is excessive hair growth all over the body.
Holy crap.
And that was when they sort of thought, okay, something interesting is happening here.
Yeah.
What if we apply that as a topical solution to the scalp? Can we get people with alopecia to start regrowing hair? And that's
Yeah.
what they started to observe in the 80s. So that's where topical minoxidil actually came about then.
That's crazy.
So if you do, on the off chance, apply topical minoxidil after derma rolling, there's a chance some of it might go into your bloodstream and might start causing hair to grow in places where you don't want it to grow.
Yeah. Yeah. All right.
Um, then I guess, the other sort, that's sort of encouraging blood flow to your scalp. So minoxidil is probably the one that everyone's heard of, and then the derma rolling on top can help. Or if you have a willing partner, nice Indian head massage a couple of times a week.
I don't want to
But
get
you
ahead
can,
of you. I'm using minoxidil. I started it. I saw, my hair I always had like really high peaks on my hair. I always had like a 5 head. My hairline was always high, but my hair had been thicker than it became as I aged. And I thought, you know what? I'll give it a try. I'm going to try some minoxidil. And I found that it worked. And then I didn't want to take Finasteride tablets orally, but I started, looking into it, and Victoria was looking into it, and we discovered the topical Finasteride as well. So that I used that combo. Man, I could see derma rolling on top of that being kind of like the trifecta.
yeah. And that's one of the big things with my own hair growth was topical minoxidil with topical finasteride.
Yes,
And that's
got the
one thing.
combo.
That's one thing that guys like, and I get a specific prescription of a spray that has minoxidil and finasteride. I don't have to do the home job that you're doing with crushing up tablets and suspending
Yes.
it in the minoxidil.
Yeah. So, and just because I know I'm going to get people asking, that's all I do is I'll have one bottle of the foam minoxidil. I'll use that in the morning, 5 milligrams, is it? And
Yeah,
then
yeah, 5%.
PM, I use the liquid version of minoxidil, which is in a it's pegylated. It's in a PEG. I just take the tablets and just drop them in there that I get from my prescription. And, if I put them in there in the morning, by nighttime, it's dissolved. And then I have a 60-day supply. I've gone a little bit higher because I get the 5 milligram tablets. But yeah, that's my combo. I'm at, I think, probably about like 1.25 milligrams topically a day of finasteride.
Yeah, and what we see is the difference between hair growth of topical and oral finasteride is very similar.
Really?
So
Okay. Yeah.
guys are going the route of what basically happened was when you read the research, they were trying to argue that it wasn't just blocking 5-alpha reductase in the scalp that was important. It was blocking 5-alpha reductase in the whole body. And that's why they were sort of trying to push oral being superior to topical for finasteride. So they'd done a phase 1, phase 2, and the results of a phase 3 clinical trial were published, I think, last year. But the results between topical and oral finasteride were pretty much the same.
I didn't realize
So
that, but I'll take it, man, because I know so many people have had issues with it orally. The finasteride syndrome, as they call it.
yeah, and it's sort of like, I think 5% of males who use oral finasteride will suffer with finasteride syndrome, like reduced libido, which continues post cessation of using the compound. So it's one of those things that guys need to be very wary about when they're making the decision to use it, because of the global effect it has in the body, which now, when you look at the research, isn't actually required. We can effectively block 5-alpha reductase in the scalp and effectively limit this androgenic alopecia.
Yeah. Right on.
Um, so without going into like the deep, if people want to follow SN Education, I have like a 50-minute talk on going into the science of 5-alpha reductase and why finasteride works. And I'm not going to bore people here. So if they do want to check out the actual molecular science, they can head over to SN Education and check out the content.
Hell yeah.
That's sort of like two parts to the treatment. So you've got your increased blood flow. You've got sort of the hormonal imbalance where you're using the finasteride. The sort of third one would be reducing inflammation.
Yeah.
So we know that inflammatory cascades within the scalp, like that telogen effluvium I talked about, where your hair is falling out because of stress. If we can limit the amount of inflammation within the scalp, whether that's through, say, dermatitis, where we have potentially increased skin growth, which is irritating the scalp then with, say, dandruff, or we have maybe another interesting thing that we're starting to see is the microbiome of the hair. So in other words, I guess how the immune system interacts with the other commensal bacteria in our head is important. And what we're actually starting to see is the bacteria P. acnes, that propione bacteria acnes that causes acne on our backs when it reaches high levels. In guys who suffer with androgenic alopecia, they're actually starting to see that approximately 80% of these males have a high amount of P. acnes within their scalp.
No kidding. Wow.
So there's potentially there that this bacteria is starting to enter into a territory where, we have higher levels of sebum being produced because of the DHT production. And that again is causing an inflammatory response that's causing damage to the hair follicle as the body's trying to combat that bacteria within the environment, basically.
Yeah.
So that's something nice to see that, when you use finasteride topically, you may be limiting the proliferation of that bacteria, again, because you're limiting the amount of DHT present in your scalp.
Interesting.
Then there's other, one thing that people asked me my opinion on was azelaic acid.
Okay.
Have you ever heard of this?
No, this is a new one to me.
So azelaic acid is used mainly as sort of like a topical moisturizer by women. But when it's applied to the scalp, it helps to limit inflammation. It helps to upregulate some of the growth factors within your scalp. And there was another study again where they combined azelaic acid with minoxidil, and that increased the efficacy of the minoxidil. So in other words, you're lowering the inflammation, you're bringing more blood flow to the area, and the dermal papilla is happy, and the hair follicle starts growing. So azelaic acid is something that people can look at for topical application if they want to go down that route.
Interesting. How would you go about that? Is there a dosage for that people should look for?
There wasn't anything really mentioned when you look at the literature in terms of dosing. It's just, again, just to apply a thin amount, I suppose, to the scalp.
Okay.
It's very difficult to probably quantify the actual amount. If you buy it as a moisturizer, there's no sort of standard dose. It's just azelaic acid in a bottle to a percentage.
I see. Okay.
Volume per volume. So you're probably just going to apply a small amount to wherever's needed. So, effectively where you're putting it on your scalp.
Yeah.
And then probably the other one that people probably don't know too much about, and there's quite a number of like patents or, again, research into it, is emu oil.
Oh, okay.
So emu oil, when you look at the literature from like the last maybe 12, 13 years, emu oil helps. First of all, it has high amounts of linolenic acid, which would be an omega fatty acid, which helps, again, nourish your hair follicle, because, again, it comes back to that nutrition aspect we spoke about. So we have to ensure that you have a nice amount of polyunsaturated fats in your diet, again, for the lipid membranes of your body in order to repair them.
Yeah.
So emu oil has a high amount of linolenic acid in it, which helps to nourish that hair follicle. But what's very interesting about emu oil is that it passes straight through your skin.
Okay.
So it's basically, in the literature, it's phosphorus deficient. So if you look at the outside of all your cells, you have this phospholipid membrane. So because emu oil has no phosphorus in it, it easily passes through your skin.
Huh, no kidding.
So what you can effectively do here then is, when you've applied your finasteride, you've applied your minoxidil, you can use your emu oil on top in order to help the absorption through the dermal layers.
Hell yeah. I like where we're going with this. This sounds good.
So in other words, what we're trying to do is take advantage of a enhanced, I guess, topical delivery of stuff that we know works.
Yeah.
And then I guess the fourth aspect to hair treatments would be, the inevitable, like we talk about over in Europe, going to, say, Turkey and getting a hair transplant.
Yeah.
And that's sort of a hair transplant. So obviously, like, the success rate of a hair transplant is greater than 90%. So basically, what you have two sort of scenarios. You have the old-fashioned way with a hair transplant, whereby they take a strip of hair from the back, which is the sort of occipital part of your head.
Yeah.
Literally cut that out and then just layer it on top of where needs hair again, basically. The other area that they sort of do, which is, I guess, the newer way of doing transplant, would be basically they remove individual hair follicles from that occipital area and then transplant that follicle into a balded area. Huh. So it's sort of a minimized scarring procedure. You're not actually having to cut parts of the scalp off. You're pulling the follicle out sort of through a punching mechanism. So they sort of punch 1 millimeter holes into that occiput area and take the hair out and transplant it in.
Wow.
Now, the thing about hair transplants, and I've sort of openly spoke about this even on social media, they fail. And most guys don't admit their failure or talk about their failure. So if we sort of look at the mechanisms of hair loss, they still apply to transplanted hair.
Yeah.
So if your hair is fallen out from your temporal region on either side, you can sort of guarantee within 5 to 6 years that transplanted hair is going to suffer the same fate, unless you incorporate some of the strategies that we've talked about there, of helping to increase blood flow, limiting the androgens, lowering inflammation. And this should be something that's sort of critically told to transplant patients of, when a transplant is done, some surgeons will encourage the use of minoxidil post-surgery in order to help the graft stick.
Yeah.
But it should effectively be prescribed for the long term.
Which makes sense. It makes total sense. I heard one time Joe Rogan made an analogy that I thought sounded really good about this. He said, hair transplant is like if you have a bunch of sick people because they live in the city and there's a lot of smog and pollutants, and that they're dying off because of that. And then you take healthy people from a clean neighborhood, like out in the suburbs, and then you move them into the city. Eventually, they're going to be good at first, but eventually they're going to get sick too.
That's a great analogy. And that's why we want to, when we're treating androgenic alopecia, the sorry circumstance is that it's sort of a lifelong treatment if you want to keep your hair, basically, because of the high instance of, Scott would love this because Scott has often talked about, the CAG repeats in the androgen receptor.
Yes.
He's often spoke about, guys who have shorter ones or longer ones. Well, basically, the people who have shorter CAG repeats will respond to finasteride therapy within their hair follicles. So we're gonna limit the amount of damage within the hair follicle. Whereas people who have higher CAG repeats, so you have this sort of polymorphism within the androgen receptor, which might make them a hyper responder, effectively leads them to losing their hair. So you can do this sort of genetic testing to see your susceptibility to androgenic alopecia, but it's more than likely approximately 70% maternally inherited. So you can sort of look at your uncles, your grandfather and your mother's side. You can sort of follow the maternal line and see, what sort of fate your hair is going to have as you age. But know that these therapies like minoxidil, etc., if they're used early, so again, if you're suffering with androgenic alopecia in your early 20s, there's nothing to say that you can't continue that therapy, forever and maintain that hair health.
Yeah.
But as soon as you stop, the processes, the underlying genetics, you can't avoid that genetics. So the hair is eventually going to fall out.
Yeah.
So it's sort of, if you're making this commitment to keeping your hair, you have to stay on top of the treatment if you want to maintain it, basically. And that's the same point that applies to a hair transplant.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess, it comes down to, how much do you care about it? For some people, like we talked about at the beginning, some people, they start losing their hair and they're like, yeah, screw it. They just start shaving their heads, and that's fine. And then there's other guys that, they just, I guess the thing is, where do you want to draw that line? I couldn't see myself ever going in for a hair transplant. But I thought to myself, it would be easy enough to try some things that would help me to retain. And actually, my hair has gotten thicker in the process. It's improved. Now, I will say I did take a step back. When I got COVID, all my hair started falling out. And I'm sure that had to do with stress, number one, and inflammation, number two. But I experienced a ton of hair loss. And when I first went back to get my hair cut, my barber looked at me and she was like, holy crap, like what happened? Because it was just across the board. Everything had thinned out and my hair got super brittle too. But now fast forward 8 months later, and it's not quite to where it was, but it's, it is what it is, I guess. Right. And I'm happy that there are steps I can take,
Yeah. And I mean, it's like myself, I have areas probably in my temporal region here, that sort of widow's peak, I'm never going to get grown back, that had slowly receded, say from maybe the age of 23, 24. And because it was so slow, you're sort of, it's fine. You don't really notice it. And then you get to like your mid-30s and you look and you go, well, actually, maybe I should have not been lazy back then and incorporated these strategies. But I think, I think you start to put a little more focus on your hair as you get older, and you realize that it's not a precious commodity, but you've sort of got a limited time of appreciating it before you actually have to start taking care of it.
Yes. Yeah, that sounds good, man.